As we mentioned, there are more Chinese food restaurants in the United States than McDonald's. So how did it happen? And why is American Chinese food so different from the authentic Chinese cuisine? I'm joined from Irvine, California by Yong Chen, a professor of history at the University of California. Why don't we start there? Why is American Chinese food so different?
Hi, Mike. Thank you for having me. Well, there are many reasons why Chinese food is so different from the food in China. In the beginning, it has to do with a number of factors, one of which is the lack of sufficient ingredients. Another factor is the fact that most of the people who cooked Chinese food in the US for a long time, I say until the 1970s, were Cantonese. So those are some of the reasons why China looks so different from the food in China. The third reason, which is probably the most important reason, is that the American consumers who went to Chinese restaurants for food did not particularly, at least in the beginning, to look for Chinese food per se. They just went to Chinese food for something to fill up their stomach.
Oh, interesting. Well, one of the most popular Chinese food restaurant chains in the United States is called Panda Express. It reached $2 billion in revenue last year. It employs 26,000 people. I talked with its founders about what it takes to make each restaurant a success. Let's listen.
What is different is local habits. For example, in India, which we are about to launch, and 50% of the people are vegetarians. And so how do you deal with a totally, and so these are the kind of things that we
talking about, India, about Chinese food.
Me?
Yes. What do you say of that?
Yes. The so-called Chinese food in different parts of the world varies a lot. If you go to Europe, go to different countries in Southeast Asia, even different parts of China, or in Detroit, go to especially African American neighborhoods, you will still find a lot of chop suey joints, little places where you could buy what used to be so popular in the U.S. That is chop suey. So, but if you go to a prosperous Chinese community in Southern California, in the Bay Area, or in New York, you can find very, very authentic Chinese food in many restaurants.
And it's interesting, I've got Chinese colleagues here. They'll seek it out. They'll find the best places. What's interesting, I think, and I want to get your thoughts on this, is you have Chinese people who moved to the United States can't really find what they consider good Chinese food. Then you have Americans who move to China who feel like, well, the Chinese food here is so different. What's the bigger show, would you say, for each?
Well, you are touching upon a very sensitive and very fascinating issue, which is what we call authenticity. Right, so this is a very important issue in the restaurant industry, right? Especially in the ethnic food industry. In that industry, people ask this question all the time. What is authentic Thai food, Vietnamese food, and authentic Chinese food? We really have to take a very deep, very hard look at the history that has transformed what we know as Chinese food. The food that I used to know when I was in China 30 years ago, when I was growing up in China, it's very different from what we have today, even in China. So who is to say what is more authentic, the food then or the food now?
Yes.
Or the Chinese food in the US, in Detroit, or Chinese food in Montreal Park, California? It's a very difficult question.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Now, let me ask one final question. What's the biggest draw of Chinese food here in the United States? Is it convenience, cost, taste, familiarity? What would you say it is?
It's a combination of different factors. I think in the beginning, for American consumers, it's the cheap, it's the inexpensiveness, it's the quantity, it's the convenience. But over time, a lot of people continue to be drawn to Chinese food, also because of its gastronomical merits. Let's face it, this is one of the most sophisticated, the longest culinary traditions in the world.
Well, I got hungry just talking to you. Yong Chen, thanks so much for joining us from Irvine, California. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.